Southern California, yeah.
Born and raised our DNA, laugh and cry to what we say. We hit you with that wordplay.
4053.
What episode are we on? D, they feeling like they be zombies, all dressed in Abercrombie.
SoCal DNA coming in live, 8 o'clock on a Wednesday night. COVID got you sitting inside, why not sip one and free your mind?
Cheap thrills, popping pills, stack cash, spend it fast.
Listen to all of Don's lies as Arjun act like he's surprised. There we go. We are back on schedule, finally, on a Wednesday night, and today is a special day. We're hitting it right at 8 a.m. or 8 p.m. How you doing today, man?
I'm not doing too well, man.
Oh shit! Dude! Oh, you should have. Oh, this is not a way to start it.
Well, unfortunately, given the era that we're in, given the times that we're in, it is the perfect way to start it. Unfortunately,
it's tough.
As you know, as everyone who's listening knows, it has been a rough couple of weeks, I would say, and of course, I'm alluding to the untimely death, the murder. I'll just go ahead and say it: the murder of George Floyd. I remember when I was just reading the news, you know, I typically look at the headlines, I scan the headlines, and I saw this happen. You know, I saw the headline in Minneapolis, and I thought to myself, wow, you know, just reading this out loud, it feels like deja vu. It feels like 6 years ago when the first time we heard the words, "I can't breathe," happened. And I remember during that time, it was such a big deal, you know, celebrities, NBA players, politicians alike, they were all calling for change. They were all clamoring for something different in the justice system. And you even remember, like, Kobe was playing back then. He had the shirt on that says, "I can't breathe." I think the whole team did. Everybody in the NBA was kind of unified in that front. And I thought, okay, let's see what happens afterward. Let's see if some real change does happen. But 6 years have gone by, and it feels like we're back to square one. Whatever progress, as little as it was, we may have made over the 6 years, we realize how fragile that progress was. And all it really took was the weight of a knee to shatter that progress. And of course, I'm alluding to what exactly happened to George Floyd, which was, you know, as people already know, you know, the cops were called on him supposedly because he was using a counterfeit $20 bill at some store. And when he was being arrested by the police, I think what happened was he was initially put into the squad car, and then he was taken out. And then I believe the lead officer, the name of which might be Chauvin, he was putting a lot of pressure on Floyd's neck and pretty much his upper body area to restrict the blood flow, to restrict the oxygen going to his brain. And he kept applying this pressure for about 8 to 9 minutes. That's a long time. And, you know, the first camera angle didn't show all the police officers on the scene doing what they were doing, but you could tell it was a very long time that he was pressing his knee into George Floyd's neck. And during this time, he was saying things like, "I can't breathe." He was calling for his mom. And it was really heart-wrenching to hear that, to see that, and to realize that the guy who's laying on top of him knows full well what he's doing. There is nothing accidental about this. He knows full well that he's preventing this man who was unarmed, from breathing, from taking a breath, which is essential for human beings to live. I mean, it doesn't get clearer than that. Later on, more footage came out, and we learned that there were 3 other police officers on the scene. I think 2 of them were also applying pressure, holding George Floyd down near the lower extremities. So there was a lot of pressure on his body, and obviously, as you know, all that pressure can really restrict the blood flow and cause oxygen to really decrease to your brain. And there was one more gentleman, one more officer who was in the vicinity, kind of acting as a lookout, making sure nobody else was intervening. And the reaction, of course, to this was monumental. It was larger than any reaction I've witnessed in my lifetime. Um, of course, I was only, what, 2 years old when the Rodney King riots happened, in South Central. I don't really have any memory of that. I've heard stories from my parents, from coworkers, from friends, but I've never actually experienced it in the way that we have been this past week. So, what I wanted to get into, and of course, this was kind of an introduction to set up our greater conversation. I wanted to get into a couple different things here. Number one, um, let's talk about the protest itself. I think protesting is something that is one of our rights as citizens of the United States of America, and it is something that has been really pivotal in granting civil liberties, civil rights to minorities, to women, to anybody who's underprivileged, and really causing change by bringing attention to things. Basically, the more people are paying attention to a cause, the more support you have for it. And the people in Congress, the legislators, they will feel the pressure. The councilmen, the city councilmen, they will feel the pressure to make changes, to basically answer the call of the people. So let me get your thoughts, Don, because I know you have a first-hand experience of this, more so than me. You were actually there on multiple days, and I think you even shot some video and shared that with me. So go ahead and kind of tell the fans, tell the audience your thoughts overall, first of all, and then what was it like seeing the protest live?
Yeah, I mean, I think you covered it well, at least provided a context as to what we're talking about with George Floyd and the actions or lack thereof that were done that sparked an outrage across our country and, quite frankly, across the world, actually.
That's right.
So, and to touch base on how you brought up the historic fact of this isn't something new. We thought something had already been done already, and change was already, moving. Kind of shines light as to why, I'll mention this, let's not get into it, why Colin Kaepernick still takes in the end, probably why he's not in the league right now, still to this day, even though to many people he is still qualified and able to do so at a high level. At least in seeing it, it was super odd. So as many of you know, to our 5-6 listeners, I have partnered, or I'm doing a little residency at Lokels Only with my company Bunso, and we had the pleasure of seeing an actual protest on the streets that were basically being walked down. We're lucky enough to have the location at a Thai restaurant called Cassie, or Kashi, depending on how you want to say it, outside of Little Tokyo, closer to downtown LA, where just 2-3 streets down we're outside of police LAPD headquarters, and another 2-3 streets down and you're at City Hall. It was very interesting to see the peaceful protests going on, and they were walking the streets, and it just seemed to go on and on and on. And it's very riveting to see different skin colors, different genders, different ages, all uniting for one voice. Wasn't frightening at all. It was more of a moving gesture, at least in my opinion, and what I felt. And it made me want to work even more, to hopefully invoke a change somehow, some way, no matter how little it may be.
Well said. And what I kind of want to get into next with regards to protests is, of course, we recognize protests are one of our amendment rights. I believe freedom of speech is tied with that in the First Amendment. Um, Now, with every protest, I believe there are goals in mind. The protesting public, they know what they're fighting for. And clearly, I think it goes without question, the short term goal for these protests was justice for George Floyd. And how do you define justice in this scenario? Well, it is really about passing a sentence, charging the police officers at the scene of the crime. Now, there was obviously some negative reaction to how long it took, especially for the first man, the main guy who was on the video, kneeling for all the wrong reasons, kneeling on the neck of George Floyd. It took days. And a lot of people brought into question, well, you know, if the roles were reversed, right? If it was a civilian maybe attacking a cop, killing a cop, the charge would happen so quickly. It wouldn't take days. Now, there's probably some truth to that. I think if you look at historical precedents, there's probably some truth to that. I also think, you know, before you actually deliver a charge that will lead to a court case, I think you do have to be careful that you have all the evidence that supports that very specific charge. And I believe initially, the main guy, Chauvin, I think might be his name, he had the charge of third-degree murder. And at the time, you know, of course you hear all about first degree, second degree, third degree. You hear terms like manslaughter, homicide, but I wasn't entirely clear on how to differentiate between first, second, and third. So just as a quick primer for everybody listening and for Don and myself as well. So the main thing is first degree is premeditated murder. So as an example, you may be stalking someone for a few days, you have plenty of time to contemplate, and then you plan the attack, you plan the murder. Second degree is really what is commonly known as a heat of the moment type of murder, a crime of passion, if you will, where let's say you come home and you see a burglar doing something to your family member. Well, if you decide to kill him in that moment, you're doing it in the moment. You're reacting to it in the moment. It's not like you were thinking as you got out of your car, hey, I'm going to kill somebody today. So that's really second degree murder. Now, it would be first degree if you saw this happen and then you maybe stepped outside really quickly, thought about what you're going to do, and then re-entered with a gun. That kind of train of thought would lead to first degree murder. Now, third degree, which is what this murderer in our story was charged with, it's basically manslaughter. And there's two types. There is involuntary and voluntary. An example of voluntary would be, you know, let's say you were fighting your friend. The D and the A are fighting. And the D punches me really, really hard in the face.
Hell yeah.
As he would. And I'm sure I deserve it. And, you know, he's not intending to kill me with that punch. Well, okay. Maybe not the best example. He usually does intend to kill me. But say he's not intending to kill me, but I end up dying anyways. So that would be actually voluntary manslaughter because there was intent to harm, right? There was intent to injure, but not an intent to kill. Involuntary would be, say, the D and the A are going on a hike, but the hike is in a very precarious position, maybe cliffside, one false step and you can die. Well, me being as clumsy as I am, if I were to stumble a little bit and accidentally bump into the D, and the D happens to fall off the cliff, I shouldn't be laughing as I say this because knock on wood, I hope that never happens. But if the D happens to fall off the cliff in that scenario, that's actually involuntary manslaughter because obviously it was accidental. The impetus to the push was accidental. I didn't intend on tripping, but you know, you died anyway. So that's still a third degree murder. That is still manslaughter. Now, keeping these definitions in mind, initially he was given a third degree murder, third degree manslaughter charge. And I thought to myself, okay, let me think about that. Is that appropriate? Well, obviously, this wouldn't be involuntary. This would have to be the voluntary definition of third degree murder. Um, and I thought, okay, he was definitely trying to suffocate the man. So that box is checked. But why is it not second degree murder? Right? Why isn't it a little bit higher? So for second degree murder, I think, you know, you would have to have the intent to kill on sight. And this is something that was recently changed for the Chauvin guy. Initially, it was a third degree murder, but I believe the authorities responsible for handing down these charges, they changed it to second degree. And I worry about that a little bit because I think when it comes to the court case, you do have to have overwhelming evidence to prove, without a shadow of a doubt, that it is second degree and not just voluntary third degree murder. Now, the one thing that's probably working in George Floyd's favor, and rightfully so, is the public sentiment. As Don alluded to, everybody, not only in the US, but across the world, feels some type of way about this. And they just want this mess to be over. They want justice to be had as quickly as possible. So I am confident that the second degree murder charge will hold, and however long the associated prison sentence is, it might be for life, I'm not really sure. I think this guy will get it. Now, Don, remind me again, I think the other three officers, they were charged recently, I think perhaps today, and were they also given a third degree murder charge, or what exactly was their charge? Do you remember?
So I don't know the specifics, but I know they're
Yeah.
getting charged with something that's along the lines of not directly second degree
I got
murder,
it.
but
I got
an
it. So
aid
I
to it.
very good, very good. So it's just for the sake of the fans and ourselves as well. The article that I found right here, that kind of explains it. It's from the Huffington Post.
Oh, strong
Richmond-
strong location, strong citation.
Some would disagree, but for our purposes, it is a strong one today. Just like the Oxford Journal. Remember the other day we were citing an Oxford student journal because we had no better source.
You know what?
So
They're strong students, man. Hopefully they get back in school one day.
I hope they do. I hope they do, and maybe eventually they'll be interns for the SoCal DNA podcast.
Yeah, maybe. We need
So
them.
we definitely do. So Daniel Marins from the HuffPost, he wrote this up today, and it was pretty good news, to be honest with you, in terms of serving justice, because it says, and I'll read this verbatim, the Office of Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison charged, and I may not be saying these names correctly, Tao, Thomas Lane, and J. Alexander Quinn on Wednesday with aiding and abetting Floyd's murder. And of course, as I alluded to, the Hennepin County prosecutor had already arrested Derek Chauvin, the former police officer seen kneeling on Floyd's neck last week, charging him with third-degree murder and manslaughter. And here's the interesting part. Ellison's office is also upgrading the charges against Chauvin to include second-degree murder without intent. Okay, so that's interesting. Second-degree murder without intent, in addition to the existing charges. Chauvin's bail, which was previously $500K, is now $1 million. So I guess the way it works on, and of course none of us are lawyers, we don't know for sure, but I believe the way it works is it's an additional charge of second-degree murder. So even if, in the remote possibility, the second-degree murder charge does not hold, you know for damn sure that the third-degree murder charge will hold, and he will definitely be put away for that. So that is interesting. I guess we'll have to see how this court case unfolds. Probably, I would imagine they're going to expedite this trial to make it happen as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm. They're going
so,
to have to.
They have to. And so that would be, the first immediate short-term goal for the protest, justice for Floyd. What I want to get into now, and sticking to protests still, what do you think the long-term goal is for this particular protest?
Tough one, because I'm sure everybody has their own ideas of what they want, but I believe it would be to somehow equal any or rather dismiss any forms of institutionalized racism and sort of level the playing field that society tends to, I don't know the right word, society tends to dictate in regards to how privileged some people can be relative to others.
Now, Don, do you think in this time that we're in this era that we're in, do you think it's important for people who are privileged to acknowledge that, and not only acknowledge it, but also take the stance that, silence, not saying anything about this issue, is actually helping go against the cause? It's helping keep the status quo in place. So do you think people who have the privilege, who have the, let's say, chances, the opportunities in life that other people simply do not have, minorities simply do not have, people who are impoverished simply do not have, do you think it's important for them to really champion the cause, cite their own privilege, acknowledge it, and use their platform, whatever they have, to help further the cause for those who don't really have the same volume in their voice for societal reasons?
Yes and no. I say yes because I think, I forget who said it. I think it might have been Killer Mike, or someone else. But to speak up one way is to enact your right to vote. So that way you could sort of beat the political schemes you may believe exist and help mold your leaders to what you see fit, which would, in some people's minds, change these problems, or at least invoke some sort of change for it. Yeah, that's what I think of when it comes to speak. There's other ways of speaking up, but that's what I'm going to interpret it as.
Okay, so what I wonder then is, how come we can't do both? How come we can't vote, exercise our political right to vote, and also show support more forcibly, more visibly?
Such as these protests?
Protest is one way to do it. I think also, you could even donate to causes that are supporting civil liberties, civil rights, supporting...
I would argue that's a silent approach, though.
Well, how so?
Because you're in the background. You're not doing anything. You're donating money.
Are you donating money to a cause when you're voting?
No.
And does a vote guarantee change?
Of course not. That's what I said. That's why I prefaced it saying what people believe would invoke a change, yeah.
So it is interesting, though, because I do acknowledge that donating money without actually speaking out loud about it is a type of silent activism.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I suppose what you're saying is those are still valid ways to exercise your political power, to exercise your day-to-day judgment about supporting a particular cause. What I wonder is, we have been doing that. People have been doing that for a while now. Do you think it simply hasn't worked? The simple act of voting, even donating to causes, donating to charities that are looking out for minorities, looking out for, making sure that police officers are being held accountable, making sure that police officers are being hired from the communities in which they serve. That has been happening, I feel, but it hasn't been enough. So this kind of leads me to another article, which I'll kind of jump in and out of. This was written by Laker great Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in the LA Times. It's a op-ed, and it's basically...
Hey, by the way, lead him through the article. I'm going to take a quick piss.
Okay, sure, yeah. Go ahead, I got you. So in this particular article, it's titled, "Don't Understand the Protest. What you're seeing is people pushed to the edge." And it was great to hear, Kareem talk about this. I wish I could scroll through it, but unfortunately, LA Times is preventing me from seeing the article right now. Okay, let me actually turn off ad blocker real quick here, if I could. If I could. But essentially, I'll kind of get into it regardless. Kareem's talking about how people may not be understanding why there's protests going on, why you know youth of America, whether they're African American, Latino, Caucasian, Asian, why are they standing up and why are they fighting for what they believe in? And in many ways, it's because there's this pent up frustration. There's this pent up aggression. Because as much as we like to think that we're moving forward with fighting racism, with repenting for the country's original sin, and by that I'm alluding to slavery, of course, the fact of the matter is this systemic oppression of people is really like an invisible dust that is choking so many minorities, so many people of color, and you don't really get to see that. You don't really see the dust until you open up the sunlight. I think something to that effect was, as Don announces his return to the podcast, something to that effect was basically stated by Kareem in this article, how, people of color are basically choking on this invisible dust, and it's only when you shine a light on it that you see that the dust exists. And in this case, dust is kind of a metaphor for the systemic oppression, the prejudice, the discrimination, the racism that runs rampant throughout America. And I get it. I think a lot of times it's so easy to say, oh, don't do this. It's not appropriate, or it'll make people feel uncomfortable. And Don actually mentioned this. He talked about Colin Kaepernick. He talked about how Kaepernick essentially was a bit of a martyr by sacrificing his career prospects to champion a cause that he believed in and to demonstrate publicly in the NFL, right? Like when the national anthem was being played, he decided to take a knee, not to go against the flag, not to go against the Patriots, not to go against the military or the soldiers like a lot of people seem to think, but really to bring justice, to bring awareness to the injustice that's been happening for decades, for centuries really, by police officers abusing their powers and damaging the already battered bridge between law enforcement and the communities by which they serve. So I think in hindsight, when you look at what Kaepernick did, he was definitely on the right side of the ledger. History will remember Kaepernick favorably. And you could make the case that he still deserves to play. We won't have to get into all that because that's not really the focus here. But you see that, that was so frowned upon. His act of just kneeling on the field alongside his brothers, alongside other people on the team, just kneeling and showing his support for a cause, a silent protest, if you will. He wasn't making any noise verbally. He wasn't calling anybody names. He wasn't calling them pigs, at least not then. But what happened? Trump blasted the NFL for showing it. Trump blasted Kaepernick. It was such a career killer for him. He could still play. Whether or not he was at an elite level, that's another question, but he could still play. He was essentially blackballed. He lost his career. And think about that, though. All he did was take a knee. So now we realize, well, nothing really happened after him taking a knee. Awareness was brought up. More people are aware of what Kaepernick was standing for, what police brutality is going on, and how it's an injustice, how, to be in the shoes of a person of color, what it really means, the type of anxiety, the type of fear, the type of concerns that these people have is something that not everyone can relate to. And I think it warrants a conversation. It warrants a conversation to basically have empathy for each other, to understand What is it like to be in the D shoes for a day? What is it like to be in the A shoes for a day? You don't know until you talk. You don't know until you bring it up. And you bring it up at the coffee tables at Starbucks. You bring it up at the break rooms at work. You bring it up at the water cooler. You bring it up at the kitchen table when you're having dinner with your wife. You bring it up everywhere, even in schools, in classroom discussions, whatever is the venue. I think people have to talk about this, because unless you talk about it, that's the first step. Unless you talk about it, nothing changes. But on top of that, we've seen that talk isn't enough, right? We've seen this talking, call for action, clamoring for change over and over again, but nothing really happens. So that kind of leads to what Kareem is talking about in this article. He's saying that these protests, which also lead to more violent acts, and that's something I'll get into a little bit later, but these protests have been quite abundant. I've read somewhere, and a friend was actually telling me that all the states in America, all 50 states, have had protests to support justice for George Floyd.
Which I find freaking awesome. I think like the day prior to it, it was 44, and even then I was just like, wow, that is amazing, right? And then I think I made it known where it's now a global phenomenon is even more impressing.
That's right. That's right. And it's so rare that something can really unify not only people together, but also nations together, right? Being in solidarity with each other, that's huge. It's almost like, how we never really had a vaccine for any type of coronavirus before, right? We've never even had a vaccine for the common cold or the flu, but that's partially because there's never been this kind of a unified front against it. There's never been this pool of resources, money, people, effort, time, just everybody working together, trying to find a vaccine. Doesn't even matter which country gets it first. Doesn't even matter which institution, which school, which business. Does not matter at all. It's all about working together, sharing the best information, sharing all the minds, and finding a vaccine. Similarly, I'd like to believe that we are seeing something to that effect in the pursuit of, and this is what I was referring to in terms of long-term goal. What Don said was correct. Changing the system of oppression, removing those, discriminatory practices. I think all that is very true. I guess in a more intermediate sense, reform for law enforcement is essential. And what do I mean by that? I don't just mean training. I think oftentimes this has come up in the past where law enforcement is given better training so they know how to deal with people from all different backgrounds, people in all different situations. But I think in this case, a greater effort needs to be made for two things. To hold police officers accountable for the power that's been bestowed upon them, right? They can't abuse that power. It's not the same as somebody who's not a sworn officer. Like if I go up to the D and just slap him across the face and start calling him names, I'm probably not going to lose my job because it's not connected. Maybe if it's recorded, I might lose my job and post it on Twitter. Might be. But for a sworn officer of the law, the standard has to be so much higher. The standard has to be so much higher. You really can't do things that are really unjust. You can't hurt the people that you have been hired to serve. And why do I say this? I think a greater effort needs to be made to hire people from within the community to become police officers. And not only police officers, but also to become people in some level of authority in law enforcement who are making regional decisions, maybe in terms of management, in terms of resource allocation, funding. I think those kind of positions need to be filled by people in the same community that they're serving. Because when
to
you
play a little bit of a devil's advocate for you, there are people that do that already.
There needs to be more, Dom. It's really not enough.
Well, but
there's
then
so many. There's so many. Case in point, in these protests that's been going on, naturally, they can't have enough police officers from one particular department, right? You can't have the LAPD doing everything. You do need to bring in more people. But do you realize that a lot of the people, a lot of the cops are coming in from other departments, from other nearby cities. They really have no connection to the community. So oftentimes, like I'm sure you've seen, we're not going to go through the videos here, but you've seen clips, you've seen videos of police officers, all different cities throughout America, dealing with the protesters in a very aggressive manner. And my opinion of it is, and sure, you can play devil's advocate and say that it's already like this, but my opinion of it is, I think the closer the bond, the closer the genuine bond between the officers and the community that they serve, the less likely these things will happen. I really think so. I really think it's a matter of trust. It's a matter of understanding that, hey, these people are on your side. We've seen stories, and it doesn't happen too often, but it's happening more and more often, of police officers in different cities showing their solidarity with the protesters by taking a knee. A simple act of taking a knee, showing them that, hey, look, we care about you. We protect you. We are here to serve your community, which is also my community. We want everybody to live and prosper. We are not advocating any kind of special treatment for officers if they're murdering people. We are not doing that. We are on your side. We want the same level of reform, because that guy right there, the Chauvin, and the three other officers, they are not upholding the same kind of oath that we all took when we became officers. So for my opinion, I just think one way to move forward would be to put a greater emphasis on community outreach, making sure that people within the community are being hired for the positions that really matter in law enforcement, so there is better trust. And I think more effort needs to be made in education as well, because I think the mistrust that so many residents of, Southern California, all over the United States, frankly, have for the police department, it has been going on for so long. It's very deeply rooted. Oftentimes, not you and I per se, but people may see a police officer and already have a reputation, already have a stereotype for them, right? All cops are bad, or this cop is just looking to arrest somebody. He doesn't care. He's just trying to get paid. He's trying to finish his queue for the month, give another ticket here, another ticket there, and then go off on his way. He doesn't care at all about the people. A lot of this is kind of ingrained in our heads. And don't you think, Don, the way to break that is to have a truly genuine relationship between the people that are protecting you and the community that's being served?
Yeah. I agree, because then it's there's an intrinsic faith that is not existent in today's setup, and by doing so you'd automatically include that. So yeah, no, I'm in total agreement with that.
Now, on the flip side of this, a lot of people are thinking, the budget for the LAPD is just way too high. The funding is just crazy high, and a lot of reform needs to be made in terms of budget for police departments, maybe across the United States. I haven't looked into the numbers. I can't really say for sure if the expenditures are really unnecessary. Certain things are just not helping, improve the quality of the policing. I don't know for sure, but have you heard anything to that effect? Protesters clamoring for, budget cuts for the police, maybe taking that money elsewhere, maybe towards schools, just changing the way the resources and the budget is allocated for police departments.
Well, I think just in general right now, when we talk about budgets and just money, we have a bigger problem on our hands with these stimulus checks and all this free money going out. It's going to be problematic regardless of whatever budget cuts we see in the future. I don't see how cutting a budget will invoke a change. I believe improving budgets does that, because of course everything at the end of the day kind of revolves around money when it comes to creating change. So no, I don't agree with cutting a budget, thinking that, oh, they're doing a bad job, so obviously they're doing something wrong. We're going to take away the money that normally fuels this, what's known to be, or seen to be, bad operation.
I think for this one, I tend to agree that optimizing a budget and maybe even reallocating within the police department towards certain things may be a good idea. But again, I can't speak enough on it because I haven't seen the numbers. Now, somebody who is known to put up big numbers, in the NBA at least, is our Laker, number 23, LeBron James.
Sure.
I bring him up not really to discuss the NBA, although some major developments have happened recently, which we'll probably get into next week. LeBron, of course, as people may know, he likes to express his opinion about different current events, about causes he believes in. And one thing that he said recently on Twitter, on May 31st, from his official Twitter handle, @KingJames, he quoted somebody, and here's the quote verbatim. "They fear what they don't understand, hate what they can't conquer. Guess that's just the theory of a man become a monster." And those words are actually from Nas, who is one of my all-time favorite rappers, maybe for Don as well. And I thought that was really interesting, how this is probably from Illmatic. I mean, I feel like I should be better at this. I should know the quote here. Well, let's say it's from Nas's debut album, Illmatic, which, as people know, came out like almost, more than 20 years ago? And it's stunning to me how timeless those words are, right? I mean, this was said in the 90s, of course, years after Rodney King. And in some respects, not much has changed. Not much has changed. I think there's like this, there was actually an earthquake that happened earlier today. I don't know if you felt it, Don. The epicenter might have been in San Bernardino, but I felt it a little bit in Irvine, when I was in the office. And I say that because there's fault lines everywhere, right? There's fault lines all throughout Southern California. That's why the most likely natural disaster for us is an earthquake. Similarly, in America, in the crust of America, there are fault lines everywhere. And these are oftentimes racial fault lines, where a very tiny stimulus is all it takes for the fault line to go. And the chasm opens up. The rift between sides grow larger and larger. And I feel like, call me jaded in thinking this, but because we've seen history repeat itself, where, Eminem even alluded to this with regards to gun control, a mass murder happens, whether it's Sandy Hook, whether it's, Las Vegas. We talk about it for months. It's nothing but the number one headline on the news. We all call for action. Some bills are proposed in the Senate and the Congress, but nothing really happens. And we eventually move on to the next thing, whether it's a natural disaster or COVID-19 or a murder. And I guess I'm a little bit jaded at this point, Don, but I kind of wanted to get your thoughts that, do you think it's really possible to have change when these fault lines are so deep, they run so deep in our country, that it's so easy to break that fragile progress and have to start over, have to have the conversations over and over again?
Yeah, it's been done in history. When the North fought the South for our Civil War. But there was bloodshed. So change is possible, but at what cost, I can't tell you in today's terms.
Well, that begs an interesting hypothetical. What do you think it'll take for real change to happen?
Colin Kaepernick getting his starting position back at the 49ers. In all honesty, has to start from the top. I think once this whole case with the police in Minnesota is done, leaders, those being our POTUS himself, which will definitely be heavily debated at the end of this year when it comes time for election. Those that lead the police department, so the chiefs, and even, or rather, influencers across all social media space and all forms of media are going to have to speak up and bring awareness to it in order to provoke the gain of education on the subject, so that way people aren't just aimlessly doing what the person next to them does, and that they're actually thinking for themselves, not just following the status quo of their friends and family. Because it takes, in my opinion, it's always the root of problems can usually have a strong stemming from it, a lack thereof of education.
That's really well said. I oftentimes think about that too, like from a personal standpoint. If I had known more things, maybe certain decisions I would make would be different. Maybe even like in regards to school, right? Like if you were really taking the time to go to class and, you know, absorbing all that knowledge and learning the material as you should, maybe you would do better. Maybe playing 2K the night before a final wasn't really the best decision.
Great idea. What are you talking about?
But, you know, I digress from that. But, you know, staying on LeBron for one more tweet, which is something I usually never do. But on June 1st, LeBron tweeted a series of emojis, basically a steaming, angry face, like just fuming from the nostrils, along with a, you know, SMH type of face, like just slapping his forehead. And he's basically retweeting Ava DuVernay, who recorded this video, or got this video from somewhere. And the caption is, you know what, I think I'm going to put Twitter away for a few minutes before I throw this phone across the room. And in the video, essentially, it's this woman who, at first, it looks like, okay, yeah, she's helping, you know, board up some of the, you know, restaurants or establishments there. She's helping some of the workers there. But then, within seconds, you realize, wait, she's not really doing anything. And then the camera pans over to her boyfriend or her significant other, who's being the prototypical Instagram boyfriend, you know, taking a nice picture of the girl with the, you know, power tool in her hand, and the other guy's nice enough to help him. And they go back into their super nice Mercedes-Benz SUV and roll on away. And you basically realize at that point that a lot of people out here, they want to show that they are helping, they're supporting the cause, but it's so superficial. This woman is kind of a microcosm of a greater phenomenon that's been happening. I believe there are basically two camps here. One camp is a group of people that genuinely do want to protest and try to bring change and justice for George Floyd. And I'd like to believe that is a large contingent of people. But then there's a smaller faction of people that maybe don't care as much about the cause as they do about showing, virtue signaling, if you will, that they care. And how do you show that? Oh, well, you take a snap on Instagram saying that, oh, hey, look, I'm at the protest. I'm participating. Or, hey, look, I'm helping rebuild the community. But really, are you? If you're doing it for the gram, then really you shouldn't be doing it at all, in my opinion. And what I want to segue into is, obviously, we talked enough about the protests, and I think Don and I both agree that protesting is something that is integral to American culture. It's something that's one of our rights from freedom of speech. Um, and of course, there's different ways you can do it. There's the silent protest, silent activism, if you will, whether it's voting, donating money to good causes, or you can be more vocal and talk about things. Do a fake Facebook post. Go out and actually convince others, to not do something that's going to hurt the community and support black-owned businesses, support minority-owned businesses. You can do a lot of things vocally as well. But one thing I have noticed, probably 90%, 95% of the protesters are peaceful. They are following most of the orders given down by the governor, given down by state authorities. But there's also this other faction of people who I personally, and Don, you may disagree, I do not classify them as protesters. I classify them as just opportunists. These people are the ones who have been looting. These people are the ones who don't care at all about the communities, about George Floyd even. And they're actually not even releasing pent-up frustration. I'm not even going to take it to that level. I think they're just taking advantage of people's suffering, of people's misery, and the timing of events, of the police officers being heavily, pretty much located in certain spots in the city, allowing this faction of people, allowing these group of people to kind of splinter off, break into stores, steal from an AutoZone, steal from a Rite Aid, a Walmart, get the breath mints that they so desperately wanted, get a bag of chips. I have no reason to think that these people are championing a cause, number one. I have no reason to think that these people are helping anything. And you can make the argument, and you know what, before I make the argument on your behalf, what do you think about that? Do you, like me, classify protesters and basically these vandals as two separate factions?
Yeah.
Or do you you do? Okay.
Yeah. No, in complete agreement. Instead of vandals, I just say looters. But
Okay.
I totally like the vandal term. Gives it that credibility that my lack of vocabulary desperately needs.
So, tell me this though. I heard some things, and maybe you can corroborate. I heard some things that, about the Rodney King era, like 1992, 1993, whatever it was. Back then, a lot of the looting, a lot of the arson that happened, that was actually racially motivated. I heard that a lot of the stores that were being attacked were owned by other minorities, like Asian minorities. And there was this kind of racial tension, more so back in those days, between different minorities, right? People of color fragmented into, African Americans, Latinos, Asians fragmented into Koreans, Japanese, whatever it may be. There was all this kind of racial tension there. And from stories I've heard from other people, a lot of the rioting, a lot of the looting was actually racially motivated. But here, quite frankly, it doesn't seem that way. I mean, I can't really justify looting a Rite Aid or looting a corporation chain like an AutoZone or whatnot. Like, who are you getting back at, right? Like, who are you really fighting against here? The man? Like, you're fighting against corporate America? You're fighting against the retail industry? I don't know. But playing devil's advocate a little bit here, I will say that I can understand why some people feel sometimes you have to burn the whole house down to spread your message. I don't necessarily agree with that sentiment. I try to look at things more practically, more logically, and I usually take a step back before doing anything like that. But I can understand how in the heat of the moment, you're thinking, this is the time. There is no time like today. Let's do something that will send a message. We may not have any real beef against this AutoZone or this Target or this Walgreens or this Melrose Mac Apple store. But let's do it. Let's break this down. Let's burn it to the ground. And this is how you have a revolution. I'm not saying that they're right. I'm not saying that they're even have their all their marbles in the right place, so to speak. They may be very much misguided, but do you kind of understand the sentiment that some people may have? I'm not talking about purely the opportunists here now. I'm talking about even a smaller fraction of these people that do think they're doing something that's progressive. That
Sure.
do think,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I do have some sentiment for those, that small sect within these vandals that you call them.
yeah.
Because it's a basic human notion where you hit me, I'm going to hit you back.
Mm,
And again, it's the lack of education in how they're hitting back. They think an eye for an eye still works, and it doesn't. Or rather, a life for a dollar equates somehow, some way, whatever rationale that is. But I do think that that sect of people that we are kind of carving out is very small compared to the whole of these vandals that, at the same time, these people who are using that as their mode of justification for doing the acts that they do don't necessarily drive that action. I feel they just want the dollar wherever they can get, and they don't care who they are hurting. And I don't even think they understand that they're hurting people, to be honest.
I think they may not appreciate that they're hurting people. I think they may understand that, yeah, people will suffer, but they don't fully comprehend what that means. So yes, you are right. They don't understand. I guess that's
I'm the one playing the video game right here. You're the one who's
Oh,
supposed
are
to...
you really? Oh, that's right. I'm not even watching your screen, but yeah, no, I think one thing though that these vandals, as I like to call them, have some respect for apparently is none other than the GOAT. And no, I don't mean your favorite. I mean Kobe Bryant. And why do I say that? Well, let me read this article that I found on this new kind of website that's been popping up a lot for me recently, essentiallysports.com, written by Aaron Matthew 2 days ago. So basically, I'll read this because it's fairly short. Los Angeles and its love for Kobe Bryant will never change. He has been immortalized in murals across the city. After coming in as an 18-year-old from Philly, Kobe played out his entire career with the Lakers, going down as arguably the greatest Laker of all time. A few days ago, George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis by policemen in an act of racism and police brutality. Since then, the whole country, including LA, has been in unrest. Protests have broken out throughout the country, both peaceful and violent. Vandalism and looting have torn down the cities with unrest. Thousands of protesters have been marched in and gathered near the city hall. Due to that, the National Guard troops had to come in and to intervene and attempt to restore order. Meanwhile, chants of "I can't breathe," "no justice, no peace," "Black Lives Matter," and George Floyd could be heard, directed at the police and the National Guard. Despite all this turmoil in the city, the Kobe Bryant murals remained untouched. And in this particular article, they reference a tweet by @LegionHoops, where the caption says, "Despite the large amount of graffiti done during the protest in LA, all Kobe and Gianna murals have been completely untouched. Respect." And I thought, isn't that just the coolest thing? Like, if anything shows you how much one man's family meant to the city of LA, I think this is it. This story, I love the story so much because even in the crazy mind of the vandals, the misguided youth of America, they're not going to touch the Kobe Bryant murals. How did that make you feel, Don?
That's great. It shows respect to those that have given us something to respect. Not only through Kobe, to go beyond that, because I think we can all get that. It is respect to Kobe. I think it goes a little bit step beyond it, where we're respecting the actual artists that had created the work as one of their own. These guys create street art, which typically isn't a high form of art to many people. And by high, I mean kind of respected form of art. It's not going to find itself in a gallery or anything of that sort anytime soon. Even though they are, but they're more of offshoots, right? It's amazing. It's quite surprising, but I guess these people have at least enough sense to understand that would probably piss off the people next to them if they were to do something to it. So they're probably just protecting themselves with the same notion.
I think you're right. I think, first of all, great point about, the fact that these are local community artists working on these murals. And in a way, this is very much intertwined into the fabric of the cities that we live in, which is great. And you want to defend that. You want to protect that. But yeah, it is fascinating to me how even some vandals, even looters have morals. They have certain things that they won't touch. So again, I think Don agrees with me here that we're both very much against the looting and the arson. We really hope that no longer happens. One weekend was more than enough. It was too much, quite frankly. I don't know about you, Don, but I was actually, especially on Saturday night, I was glued to the TV because I had the local news on, flipping through KCAL 9, Fox 11, ABC 7, and just watching all the carnage. And I'm just thinking, how is this real? I'm kind of sitting in the comfort of my home watching it, but knowing full well that this is actually going on in these streets. And you, of course, saw the protest, one of the protests live, so you knew it was very real. And I hope that, with the police presence, and I know in this podcast, I have been championing the cause of justice for George Floyd, and I have been very aggressively against those 4 police officers, and rightfully so. But let me just say that we need the police. We need them on our side. When shit goes south, right? When the shit hits a fan, we call 911 for a reason, right? We call 911 for a reason. And so knowing that the police officers are out there, for the most part, protecting the community and making sure the protesters have enough space to do what they need to do, making sure that nothing goes out of hand beyond that. I hope that all the cities are well prepared. I hope that we don't see anything else this weekend. And, past couple of days, yes, there has been some looting, but it is nothing compared to what happened this past weekend. So I like to believe that the protests are becoming more and more strictly peaceful, and they stay that way. And the offshoots, the characters, the shady suspects coming in from other cities nearby, I hope that they're kind of done. They did what they needed to do. They got it out of their system, and hopefully they're not planning anything else. I really hope so. Before we close on this particular long-form segment of the podcast, do you have any closing thoughts, Don, on George Floyd or just the systemic racism in America, or anything in general regarding what we covered today?
No, honestly, it's just stay safe out there. It's unpredictable what could happen, and don't forget that it is COVID season still. So if you are going out there, at least try to protect yourself in some way, shape, or form. Now on 2 fronts, not just one.
That's definitely true. And that's actually an interesting segue. We haven't talked really much about COVID in some time, and it almost seems like COVID season went away with this whole saga, right, that started this past week. And just the sight of seeing so many people outside, coming together for one cause, it makes you forget that COVID is still very, very real. And we don't have a vaccine yet. I believe the U.S. has surpassed 105,000, is it deaths? I think it's deaths, right? Yeah, 105,000 deaths, and probably millions more confirmed cases. And it's only going to go up. You like to believe that during the summertime with the, very high UV index, The sun rays will do what they can, as Don likes to say, the sunlight heat will help eradicate the virus. But even then, I mean, knowing that a lot of the restrictions in California, at least, have been lifted, a lot of businesses are back to work. A lot of restaurants are starting to open up soon, I think. It's just, I worry about a second wave. I don't know for sure if it's going to be as pronounced as some of the models kind of, draw it out to be. But do you think that given what's happened this past week with the protests all through the 50 states, do you think we're more likely to have a second wave now?
Yep.
Easy,
man, hands down. I mean, look at there's people that are going out there, and you were watching the news. They're not all masked up. You can see the proximity between them. They're definitely not, within the CDC's recommendation of 6 feet apart. Like it's baffling. But at the same time, it showcases the level of importance this issue has with people. So, it's gonna happen. It's gonna come back, I think. And it's gonna be even worse.
Why do you think it'll be even worse, though?
When I mean worse, not so much the COVID sickness. I mean more so of the fact that people are not going to want to stay at home. They're going to get cabin fever. And if justice isn't brought accordingly, it will just give people more reason to just say, fuck it, we're going out, regardless of the circumstances.
Sometimes I wonder if that is okay, right? Like, really, we've overcome the first peak. We're not going to see the same number of deaths, at least at the rate that it's been happening over the past couple of months again. We may see an influx happen as flu season overlaps with COVID season. But the way I look at it, after a certain point, don't you think for America and for everybody across the world, it's a matter of confidence? It's a matter of saying, you know what, I understand there's a risk, but it's a risk that I'm willing to take. Just like anytime you drive your car, there's a risk of you getting into a fender bender. Anytime you go on an airplane, there's a smaller risk of you, having some kind of a incident up there. There's always a risk in everything. Every time you go for a swim at a public pool, there's a chance you could drown. And I wonder if really it's a matter of time before, and maybe, as you like to say, this whole saga with George Floyd is the catalyst for that. It's actually getting us to be more confident that, you know what, even though it might be kind of tough out there, if I have a mask on, I'll be good. I'll be able to go into a restaurant, take off my mask for eating, put it back on when I dip out. I'll be able to go to the movie theater, and I don't care if there's people to my left and right. I got a mask on. It's okay.
What makes it difficult, and I get it, the confidence can help influence people's decision making. What I've been reading about COVID is, at least with what they're seeing in China, that shit is mutating, and the most current mutation seems to have a longer incubation period where people are not symptomatic as quickly as they had thought they should be upon contracting COVID. So yeah, people may think it's okay and have the balls and audacity to go out, but if we stand by science, that's just going to make things much, much worse.
I mean, that's always the age-old debate, right? Do you fully stand by science? Do you fully stand by the economy? Or do you find a middle ground? And usually we find a middle ground. And I think we're very much set in our path right now. With sports slowly starting to come back. I mean, for those of us, or for the fans that remember, it was probably about 3 weeks ago that we saw the first live event, the UFC 249.
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic event. There's been a lot of interesting updates about the fighters in those matches, but we won't have to get into that now. I'll just say that we're starting to see a new normal form where sporting events are happening with fans not in attendance. We're starting to see businesses change their mode of operation. Restaurants primarily doing pickup or delivery. You're seeing a lot of the places that are retail right now maybe change up their layout, maybe have stickers on the floor saying, hey, you have to stand here before checking out. You can't be close to anybody. And more or less, to be honest with you, I've gotten used to it. In these past, let's say, 3 months, give or take, it was kind of weird at first, getting used to all the new rules and regulations, being forced to wear a mask all the time, just being extra cautious about like coughing in public.
Sure.
Because if you cough in public, you're going to get some looks, you're going to get some stares for sure. But I kind of got used to it all. And if I can get used to it, I'm sure a bunch of everybody else is eventually going to get used to it too. And slowly but surely, we'll start peeling back the layers, right? We'll start reducing the social distance, from 6 to maybe, 3 feet. Because as long as you have the mask on, that does help a lot. People were denying the mask for so many years. As we talked about incessantly on this podcast, a lot of the Asian countries had a head start on this. They knew that it helps to have a mask on just to prevent and protect other people from getting in contact with your spittle from your droplets. Now that the UK and Western countries like the United States have adopted this, I honestly feel like we may become a healthier populace, at least when it comes to flus, colds, sicknesses, common colds, and even coronavirus moving forward. You kind of get that feeling too, Don, that now that masks are not stigmatized, we'll just be a little bit more hygienic from now on.
Yep. And what did it take? It took an educational piece to invoke that change. Knowing that, okay, well, it may not be perfect, but it is a strong, scientifically backed attempt at curbing something.
Now, another thing that may need curbing would be social media giants. According to our president here, Mr. Trump.
Good guy. Good guy. He's a pretty good guy.
Well, your opinions on the man are well known. I think our listeners know how you feel about him quite well. The real red side is over there, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, really... Oh, it took you about an hour to get to that?
I know. I was supposed to avoid it. But I did say I would drop that in after we were done with the first segment.
Jeez.
So basically, this article that I found is a little bit dated. It's from CNN, and it was written by Brian Fung, Ryan Nobles, and Kevin Liptop on Thursday, May 28th, 2020. And essentially, this is going into a new wrinkle in Trump's ongoing war against the media. This time, the media is actually social media, because Trump thinks that Twitter specifically is kind of censoring him. And how, you might be wondering, how are they doing this? Well, I'll read a little bit of this article here. So President Donald Trump signed an executive order targeting social media companies on Thursday, days after Twitter called 2 of his tweets potentially misleading. Speaking from the Oval Office ahead of signing the order, Trump said the move was to defend free speech from one of the gravest dangers it has faced in American history. So basically, when it happens to him, it's one of the gravest dangers. And it's quite interesting, because I think there's this whole debate, you could say, that's been raging on about how much liability, how much governance do social media platforms really have on the content that's posted on them by, you and me, by civilians. And I think because of some law that was passed maybe in the 90s about internet rights and internet usage, I think they are kind of allowed to tailor the content that appears on their platforms as they see fit. Because if you think about it, it is their business. And the First Amendment rights that we have, all the amendment rights that we have, I believe they pertain more to governmental actions, right? Like the whole idea of your First Amendment rights, they don't necessarily apply to, let's say, businesses in all forms, right? For instance, there was a gentleman who was really trying to forcibly make his way into a Costco and buy a cart full of items without having a mask on. And he recorded the confrontation he had with the store manager, who basically very politely refused him service because he did not have the mask on and took his cart away. And then the guy was like, I thought this was America. I thought I woke up in America. What is this? And it kind of goes to show the ignorance that some people have, that just because, yes, you're an American citizen, does not give you this like universal right to say whatever you want, do whatever you want, get access to anything that you want. In some regards, yes, you can, as it pertains to the government, but I believe because of the laws that were passed, Facebook, Google, Apple, they all have the authority to censor things in deference to their terms of contract or their terms of agreements. Basically, the thing that nobody reads when they create a new Gmail account, the thing that nobody reads when you create a new, Facebook, whatever it is. I think terms of conditions or something. I forget what it's exactly called, but I think you get the picture. But what I wanted to ask you was, does Trump have a point here? Does Trump saying that, this vehicle that I use to directly talk to the 300 million plus, people of America every single day, multiple times a day, if this is censored in some way, if this is flagged in some way that changes the validity or the perceived validity of the message, is that okay?
No. I don't really quite get your question, to be honest. So, are you saying if Trump, by implementing this law, go ahead and restate your question.
Sure. The question is basically, do you agree with executive order?
I mean, Trump is... It's hard to say because the censoring of speech is going to be cited in this, right? They're censoring the president's ability to say whatever the fuck he wants on the internet. Whether or not a business should have that power, personally, I think they could do whatever the fuck they want. They're a business. And there are other platforms by which you can have your free speech or free statements, whatever you want to call it. Free thought. Whether or not it's the right thing to do, I don't know. I don't know, man. It's too complicated, dude. It's too complicated. This is why we study law.
I mean, the way I look at it, I think people in power will always try to interpret the law in a way that they see fit. So...
Oh, of course. That's why there's like tax evasion and things of that sort. There are loopholes by which you can evade rules, which are basically laws, right? If you want to simplify that. I don't think it just applies to people in power. It applies to everybody. We all try to find our little hacks here and there that give us a little one-up that we normally wouldn't have. That's why we shop for sales. We shop for coupon codes and stuff like that.
Well, here's something interesting. What do you think the reaction would be if Twitter just deleted Trump's account?
We'd all laugh, first off.
Sure.
And I think it would backfire on Twitter, to be honest, where they're silencing someone who can be noted as the most powerful man in the world right now. I don't know. So I think what happened. Would it happen?
I think it's been too long of a time that Trump has been using his Twitter to reach the people, for Twitter to actually come back and say, hey, you've had too many violations, we're gonna shut you down.
We're gonna shut you down.
And this is the gray area where it gets really complicated, because as you said, Trump is arguably one of the most powerful people in the world, just based on his office. And if the main vehicle that this guy uses to communicate is threatened, he will see it as a personal vendetta against him.
Sure.
And he will cite everything in the Constitution. He will throw the book at Twitter. And I agree with you that I don't think Twitter would gain as much as they would if they had done this early on, right? Like, if early on in Trump's presidency, of course he was saying very outlandish things. If Twitter took the stance of, hey, there's a lot of misleading content here, there's violation after violation, we're going to suspend you, or we're going to censor you. Imagine how epic that kind of a reaction would be. Imagine the support that Twitter would get. You know, the publicity. Twitter doesn't need publicity because Twitter creates the publicity for everything else. But imagine the type of support Twitter would get for standing up to a bully, standing up to the tyrant. But now, damn near, 4 years into it? Almost 4 years, 5 years? I think that ship has sailed. I think it's really not something that's possible for anybody. I mean, this is not like a conspiracy theorist who shall not be named getting blacklisted by YouTube, by Spotify, by all social media. It's not like that. This is the president, and I think with the president, you basically have to give him unlimited slack. And Trump knows this. So that's why I have a feeling that his executive order may stand. It may stand. I hope not. I hope that, I haven't seen the Twitter feed exactly, but I think what happens is whenever Trump says something that's not verified, or it could be like some fake news that he might be peddling,
sure,
Twitter just labels it. Twitter marks it a certain way. And I kind of like that. I mean, because if you think about it, you're a busy guy. You read 5 books at a time, 4 magazines at a time. You don't have the time to really fact check. But if you saw something on a tweet that said, oh, questionable source, or this has not been corroborated by anybody else, this is a known lie, or this is a known fact, whatever, I think that would give you more confidence about the material you read. And it would also make you appreciate the objectivity of people in power. Because too often, there is a media spin on everything. It's impossible to avoid. You turn on a channel, you read an article by Oxford student or by the Huffington Post, there's always an inherent bias in there.
Sure.
And it takes some effort to recognize that bias. As you get older, I think with time, you become more accustomed to it. You just know that, yeah, certain publications, certain sources, certain media outlets are always going to be conservatively biased or liberally biased or pro this, pro that, whatever it may be. But I like the idea of kind of a global fact-checking, because I don't think anybody really gains from the spread of misinformation other than those who are spreading the misinformation for profit. Sure. So that's my 2 cents. That's my 2 cents.
It's a strong 2 cents. Pretty strong.
Not enough to buy anything, but it's
enough. It's the thought
it's in
that
the
matters,
pig.
right?
It's in the piggy bank. It's in the piggy bank. So obviously, we covered some heavy hitters today, but one thing that I will like to talk about that we haven't really gotten into is, I guess, a continuation of Elon Musk's conversation. Last time we talked about Neuralink, which was really cool, the whole idea of embedding a chip inside of a human's brain and allowing, a connection to happen between all the peripherals, all the gadgets that we possess and our brains, so that the action potentials can be firing in succession, and we can basically do things a lot faster than we're accustomed to doing now. I thought that was really cool, and shout out to my friend Zed for recommending that one. It was a really cool thing to get into. This week, our Elon Musk topic for today is about his other company, SpaceX. And of course, as people may know, SpaceX is a private company that is trying to send different spacecraft, satellites, whatever it may be, into space. And they have been working on this stuff for many years now. And something very monumental happened for them this past weekend. They were able to successfully launch a manned shuttle into orbit so that they would eventually dock into the ISS, the International Space Station. And, you know, there was a slight hiccup earlier in the week, actually, because the original launch was scheduled, I think, one of the weekdays, but because of weather, they couldn't do it. So they, naturally, they delayed it to Saturday afternoon. Weather was a little bit better. Your boy, Trump, showed up. Pence showed up as well. And they were watching this happen. And everything went off without a hitch. Everything was so smooth. And it was a huge success. They were even able to recover, I believe, one stage of the rocket, which they can repurpose for future missions. And by doing so, you save a lot of money. You basically reduce the time and the cost that it takes to send people into space and to send anything into orbit. And I thought for that reason alone, it was very cool. This may usher in a new era of private industry supporting NASA and, building these rockets or, whatever equipment is necessary to further our understanding of space, further our exploration of space. And, I just really enjoyed watching it. I mean, I haven't really watched too many liftoffs, live. You see the highlights of it and you see the movies, but to watch that I think that was really cool. I don't know, Don, did you get a chance to catch the highlights of it? I know you were busy that day.
I think I was working that day and I totally forgot about it. To be honest, I think like my buddy or my brother actually messaged me saying that because he's an asshole and he was I think our family was talking about something else, something more specific, and he's like, "Hey, by the way, SpaceX." I'm like, "Oh, okay." But I did not. That's very fascinating that it went off without a hitch. But I think it goes to show that whatever Elon Musk kind of sets his mind to, he'll get it done eventually, at the very least. It's scary.
Yeah, I think he has proven himself to be, I think, of the same caliber as like a Walt Disney or a Steve Jobs.
Sure.
Really revolutionizing the industry, number one, multiple industries for that matter.
But what's super odd is that the applications of his creations are so much more vast than the guys you just mentioned, Steve Jobs and Walt Disney. At least Walt Disney for entertainment. I mean, I equated Steve Jobs to entertainment with the damn iPhone, but I mean, technologically it's been far advancing. It's weird. Can you think of anybody else that you would tag in that stellar group of people?
This may be a setup. I would say, although I can understand the arguments against it. If you believe that what Disney did for entertainment was extremely important for the whole world, I would say that although this man is not finished yet, I think Kanye has a chance to join those ranks.
I knew you were going to say something like that when you kind of preface your statement with something. I knew something's coming.
Which I do often. I preface the hell out of everything. But I say that only because, and I don't want to spend another 5 minutes ranting on Kanye, but I'll say that you know, different musicians can have tremendous influence over the youth, over even generations. And I think Kanye has done that on multiple fronts. He has done that with his music, of course, and he has done that with fashion too. I don't think, at least in the past decade, any shoe line has been more popular than Yeezy. I think you can even.
Jordan.
Mm,
I mean, but the thing is, Jordan kind of they're more of reiterations more than new shoe releases, right? But I get where you're going with it. Sure, sure.
and even beyond that, like I appreciate that he's getting into, not just shoes, but like a wider Yeezy fashion line. He's trying to really carve out a niche for himself in the fashion world. Beyond that, he's getting into other productions, right? Like he's doing operas, which may not have been successful, but many first operas aren't. He's getting into, you know, production in various facets, not just for music, for cinemas as well. I think he came out with some movie. It may have been semi-autobiographical, but he's been getting into different outlets, and I
Sure.
feel like because Kanye West is such a recognizable face, a sound even worldwide, his platform is larger than most. And with that platform, he has potential to do a lot. One of the other things that's kind of, I wouldn't say revolutionary, but it's really thinking outside the box is, as we talked about before, what he's doing in Wyoming, right? Like building up that community in his own vision. And who knows? I think he probably wants to have pockets like that all throughout the US and maybe even in other countries too, where people can kind of live, enjoy their lives, work all in the same kind of area through his vision. You could call it kind of cultist. You could think of him as kind
Kinda,
of a,
kinda.
I, it's a little iconoclasm, right? But at the same time, who else is doing that? I look at it in that way. So when you ask the question about who else would you put in that category, I look at people who are doing things that are really out of the box and not really following the grain, really going against it, challenging conceptions, challenging preconceived notions, and breaking barriers at the same time. And I would have to say Kanye fits the bill. Elon Musk is doing it probably in a more, you know, advanced level, in a way that can help people in multiple ways, right? Through, you know, electrical vehicles, through, his boring company digging the tunnels underneath
Underneath
uh,
LA.
underneath LA, which may be causing some earthquakes. But I like that he is forward thinking. I haven't really spent too much time digging into all the details of his ventures, but just from the articles that we've been reading, learning about Neuralink, learning about SpaceX, it's just so cool that it's all kind of one man's vision. Of course, there's tons of people helping him, and he has the luxury of having the brightest minds work for him. And that is a luxury that not too many companies have. The reason why a Tesla, for instance, is doing so well is because they have really the best talent. Like, people want to work for Tesla. And, Ford may be working on electric vehicles now, Chevy may be working on electric vehicles, but people don't really want to work for Ford in the same way. People don't look at Chevy and think, oh man, it'd be so cool to work for that company. But they think, oh, Tesla, cutting edge, this is very
Well,
modern.
and I
Oh,
think
go
it's
ahead.
also they offer benefits that are, you know, the best across all industries. They have
Mm,
that kind of Google campus mentality where you have everything you need there. You don't need to
mm,
leave. Everything is provided for you. Your health insurance is in the top 1% of the top 1%. So long as you fit the criteria and you're a meaningful employee, things
mm,
of that sort. Um, they're revolutionizing what it means to be a top tier company, something to aspire to eventually work for. And not only that, they're revolutionizing the world with what they do. So what better way than to revolutionize the actual workspace itself? It's throughout the company, to its product, to its people, to just the basic idea of it. Everything about it is amazing.
Would you ever consider buying a Tesla?
Yeah, I definitely would. The thing is, I don't have the money for it.
Well, let's say, the interesting thing is, I'm glad you brought that up. Recently, Tesla has discounted all of their current fleet of vehicles.
Just because. Oh, so here's something that I learned. Not to cut you off, but I think I'll forget about it unless I mention it now. Mm-hmm. A wise mentor of mine once told me, just because something is on sale doesn't mean you should buy it.
Did I tell you that last week?
No, that wasn't you. No. It's a man I highly respect, one of my old bosses.
I got you. Well, yeah, I'm not. No, that's great.
I love how you try to take credit for it.
Well, I mean, because we had a conversation, I think, on the previous podcast where we were talking about like deals, like slick deals and BrickSeek and whatnot. And I think one of the questions I raised was, hey, like, why do we go for deals? Like, what is the whole reason we do this? And you never brought this man up before. You never brought this quote up before.
Yeah, well, I probably just didn't want to bring it up. I'll save it for a good notion right here. But no, go on about your Tesla. About
Well, I don't even want to go on.
I don't want to.
But no, I mean, it was just something I read that they're discounting the Model 3,
sure,
the Model S, maybe the Model Y as well. Like I think up to $5,000. It's like either from like $2,000 to $5,000 depending on the model, which is still a lot. I mean, I think last I checked, the Model 3 was like what, $35,000, like around there.
I don't look at anything past 5 figures. It's too hard for me. I don't make buku money like some people.
Wait. Let's roll back what Don just said. You don't look at anything past 5 figures. You mean past 4 figures then?
Past 5 figures? Do you not know what 5 figure means?
Well, $35,000 is 5 figures.
Yeah, so I don't look at any. Oh, I see. Yeah. I don't look at anything past 4 figures. See, you're misunderstanding me. Fans and listeners, go ahead and play the replay. Replay it back. Go back about 30 seconds. You'll hear me correctly.
I'll apologize on behalf of SoCal DNA. See, it's been a few years since we took a math course.
Oh so. Yeah, I don't use math and finance at all.
Excel does it for you, right?
Yeah, basically. No, mine is all freaking projections nowadays. It's not even raw numbers like that. Oh man.
But no, it's all good. I think Tesla's definitely out of my budget as well. I
would love it, dude. I keep telling my wife, I'm like, one day I want to get those solar panels in and get that battery, that home battery
Yeah.
And it makes sense in the long run, so long as you have that initial capital that you can easily, use.
Dude, if you ever do decide to put PV cells on top of your roof, let me know. I'll help you out.
Oh, you're gonna help me? You're gonna get the drill and everything? We could play the YMCA in the background, and we'll make it happen.
Yeah, man. We'll get some lemonade for break.
There we go. Extra ice. It's gonna be a hot day. We choose to do it too. With some boba ice cream. We'll make sure the boba ice cream and the halal guys is downstairs ready.
There you go. I like how we're gonna do everything in one day. We're gonna build your fucking solar cells and do a podcast on the same day.
Hell yeah. We're gonna frame it and everything, man. It's gonna be great. Hopefully it sticks.
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell our listeners that I know this has been one of the heaviest podcasts that we did.
Yeah, man. This was rough, dude. I was letting you lead it. I'm trying to lighten it up right now with my fake lack of knowledge about 4 figures and 5 figures. See, you guys. See,
Don was joking. See, he was joking. He was being sarcastic, just like our president.
Man. You know.
But the fans definitely appreciate, adding a little bit of sugar to this spice. But obviously, the mood of the country is not going to die down anytime soon. As Don said before, We hope that people are safe out there. They're careful.
Mm-hmm.
Protest the right way. Don't hurt the people in your community. Don't loot. Don't do any arson. Um, we're all on the same side at the end of the day. We are trying to make the world a better place. And the way we do that is together, is through peaceful activism, and hopefully change will come. I know it sounds like a cliche, it sounds like deja vu, but persistence is the key. And I think on that note, with that note of optimism and hope and faith, I think we will sign off on this one. We will catch you guys next time. And of course, a little bit of a preview. Some big news came out recently about the NBA, which we will get fully into next time. And I think we'll get into the pros and cons of the plan that's being set forth. So until then, you guys have a great rest of your week. Any last words, Dom?
Yeah, have a good one, guys. Have a good one.
All right. Take care.
Peace.